Hello, this is Jerry, and welcome back to our studies in the book of Nehemiah. We are on part 5, chapters 4 and 5, and we're in the middle of Sanballat and Tobiah's relentless attempts to halt the Jews rebuilding the walls and gates of Jerusalem. They're governors over neighboring regions, and they don't want a thriving Judah to compete with them. They probably don't care for Judah anyway, with a history of conflict even before the Babylonian captivity. Ultimately, we see the hand of evil behind this opposition to Israel, out of whom will come the Messiah. We also noted Sanballat and Tobiah instigated more opposition, with Geshem and the Arabs to the south and the kingdom of Ashdod to the west. And surprisingly, we saw a large number of Jews around Judah who were very pessimistic about the success of the Jerusalem project. They had a saying about how the project would inevitably fail. Morale among many in Judah was low, and we talked about the power of encouraging words for good or discouraging words for evil. So we're in the middle of the action in chapter 4, verse 11. And our enemies said, "They will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work." So scheming a quick surprise attack, not just to halt their work, but to kill them. At that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, "You must return to us." The Jews in the surrounding towns, where many of the workers were from, were regularly hearing and seeing evidence for this overwhelming sudden attack. They were streaming in to warn the workers over and over to flee, go back home. We see what you're not seeing. They're getting ready to wipe you out. How disturbing and frightening that must have been. The team of Sanballat and Tobiah has rallied. Now there's 3 levels against the workers. The military threat of the 4 powers that successfully made their alliance against Judah. There's the discouragement and pessimism of many in Judah. And third, now the warnings of these Jews in the immediate area of Jerusalem. Fright is easily passed to others, just like discouragement. So here's 3 ways the enemies have succeeded in putting fear and pressure upon the workers. The score is now 3-all. Well, we started a tally last class. Yet we don't hear of even one worker defecting from the project. They were a team. Now, how did Nehemiah respond? So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in the open spaces, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. Nehemiah the governor, project manager, and now their general, places the workers in the lowest parts behind the wall for the best cover from spears and arrows, and he armed them and kept the families together. So in an emergency, they won't be distracted by worrying about other members of the family. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes." Nehemiah led them to a courageous faith response to the military threat, focusing them away from just personal fear. First, this was a cause much larger than any individual. This was God's work. Have faith in Him, the ultimate project manager. Remember the great and awesome God we serve. He'll protect us. Second, think of your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Remember your loved ones. And Jerusalem must have security with walls and gates. Didn't they want security for their sons and daughters as they grew up? This current threat from the nations around them illustrated so clearly the need for defensive walls and gates. G.K. Chesterton wrote, "The true soldier fights not because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him." When the men and women overseas in World War II wrote letters or were interviewed in the field, they were not caught up with the abstract ideals that the politicians and journalists talked about. The soldiers were much more earthy, like to protect the freedoms of their families back home and the preservation of America as they knew it, the country they loved. Many of you remember the life of Ernie Pyle, an embedded writer among the World War II soldiers killed in the Pacific Theater. On the beaches of Normandy with D-Day, Pyle saw some camera snapshots of families back home staring up at him from the sand left by wounded or killed American soldiers. Think of that. Some of these photos were out of their pockets and in their hands with their weapons in this terrible firestorm of resistance. Those men were fighting for and drawing courage from their loved ones. Nehemiah urged them, remember your God, your homes, the freedom and safety of Judah, and your family and loved ones. Now that's what we want to be reminded of before somebody puts us in combat, right? God, country, and family. So we aren't just thinking about our own lives. When our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. And the people got immediately back to work. Pulling the Jews ahead on my scorecard, Jews 4, Sanballat and Tobiah 3. It's a back and forth struggle. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. So half were working, as we see on the bottom right of this picture, and half on guard patrol. And there was Ezra or Nehemiah praying above in this picture. Don't you love Gustave Doré? This ever-present militia creates a much stronger deterrent. Any enemy scouts can see the Jews lined up and ready to fight. If they were all working, they would look more vulnerable. And I'm sure the Jews felt more safe with this arrangement. So God gave Nehemiah the wisdom to do this, even though it slowed the work. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. Oh, I love this. The leaders were right there with them, not aloof, not more safe somewhere else, or in the shade somewhere. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. Here's another segment of workers who were shuffling rubble or supplies or water. They did so while fully armed. Nobody would ever be running around looking for their weapon. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. So even those building did not have their swords nearby, but on their person. And the trumpet player walked around with Nehemiah, who was both overseeing and watching the horizon. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall, far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So another good strategy. Since they were spread out in work groups, they planned to converge at the place of attack and where the trumpet sounded. And Nehemiah gives another reminder that our God will fight for us. He will give us victory. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. Now, you know the stars don't appear until after the sun is down for just a bit. They worked until dark. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor my men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. As I said, Jerusalem became a work camp. Better to keep all the workers in the same general area. And I'm sure they changed their clothes regularly. They're working hard. But they didn't shed their day clothes at night in case of a night attack. And there was no vulnerable time or place that the enemy could discern. All of this is a wonderful blend of faith and vigilance. And so ends chapter 4. Chapter 5 is a surprise bombshell that completely changes the subject. What could be more important as to interrupt this story? Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, "With our sons and our daughters we are many, so let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive." We learn there's a food shortage. How serious is this? There are also those who said, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine." It's so serious that those in the first and second returns who now owned land were mortgaging their fields and homes to get grain. And there is a famine going on. No rain and scarcity of food. Wow! How many more challenging circumstances can there be at one time? With the food shortage, this was not a convenient time to be burning so many calories building the wall and gates. And there were those who said, "We have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and on our vineyards." Here's another group of landowners who borrowed money to pay the king's tax. But the crux of it all comes here. "Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children are as their children. Yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved. But it is not within our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards." In all this desperation, the more wealthy nobles were taking advantage of the needy and other landowners. When people could not make payments on loans from them, they took their sons and daughters as slaves. Imagine, in those hard times, taking advantage of their fellow Jews to add to their own wealth and property. Not that this wasn't common in the ancient world. Hard times bring out the best in some and the worst in others. In this famine, I'm sure some were sharing, helping their neighbors, but these were shrewdly gaining property, servants, and more wealth. What was Nehemiah's response? "I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these words." For all the treachery against Nehemiah so far, this is the first time we're told Nehemiah was angry. I don't think I would want Nehemiah furious at me. How about you? "I took counsel with myself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, 'You are exacting interest, each from his brother.' And I held a great assembly against them." After collecting his thoughts, because this delicate matter had to be done right, Nehemiah calls a great meeting in Jerusalem to bring all this out in the open. Lots of people were frustrated, hungry, and angry. Then he called out these nobles. And Nehemiah, that is, said to them, "We, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations. But you even sell your brothers, that they may be sold to us." They were silent and could not find a word to say. Nehemiah says that as often as the Jews could, they bought other Jews out of indentured slavery when they were in Babylon. But now these nobles were selling Jews back into slavery among themselves. The nobles were speechless. Yes, what could be said? In so few words, Nehemiah perfectly exposed the tragic irony. "So I said, 'The thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to be walking in the fear of our God, to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies?'" Nehemiah has that great balance between the Lord and our human responsibilities. He says, don't you fear God? And don't you remember we're in the middle of this conflict with enemy nations threatening us? They needed their morale not to be fighting each other. Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us abandon this exacting of interest. So Nehemiah and even his paid servants were modeling a good practice by lending out money and grain to help the less fortunate in a compassionate way, not to capture their lands or money. So there's no excuse from the nobles like, I was just trying to help them. No, if you were trying to help, you'd be doing something like what Nehemiah and others were doing. And then Nehemiah's final charge in front of them all. Return to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the percentage of money, grain, wine, and oil that you have been exacting from them. And their response? Then they said, we will restore these, and require nothing from them. We will do as you say. And I called the priests and made them swear to do as they had promised. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep this promise. So may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, Amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. That's a perk of wearing long, loose robes. You can shake them out while you're still wearing them. Nehemiah not only has the gift of leadership, but of exhortation. With the fear of God, he effectively exhorted this sinful nonsense out of those wealthier Jews. He verbally banged their heads together, and they immediately complied. And all the disgruntled people said, Amen, to the result, and praised the Lord. Now, isn't it interesting? There was a famine going on while the Jews were building the wall. Famine was common enough in the Old Testament, and God is in charge of the weather. And God never brings upon his people more than they can bear. So for some reason, perhaps to increase their dependency upon him, there was this famine then. I don't suppose any of you have ever faced several big trials at one time. Nehemiah never highlighted the famine. It just came out in the telling of the people's complaints. And we say, as readers, oh, there was a famine too? Now the rest of chapter 5 is a testimony from Nehemiah, making public, in light of those nobles, that he was not abusing the governor's office, or even accepting what was due for the governor. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors, who were before me, laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Wow, 150 plus people Nehemiah was feeding, including foreign guests, as he was looking out for the foreign policy interests of Judah and Jerusalem. Now, what was prepared at my expense for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep and birds, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. Nehemiah was not boasting, but giving a testimony and an example for the people, similar to the Apostle Paul when he defended his ministry in 2 Corinthians, Galatians, and 1 Thessalonians, and shielding his ministry from false rumors. It's hard to fault someone who doesn't even draw a salary and use the budget, but funds it all himself. And we see that Nehemiah came to Jerusalem as a very wealthy person. He had been a very high court official. Now he was buying all the food for 150 plus people at his table and loaning to others in this famine. I don't know if he spent most or all his money, but certainly he poured a lot of his wealth into this Jerusalem cause without drawing any from the people. And why was that? Well, he gave two reasons. First, because the service was too heavy on this people. All that salary and food at a time when the people were struggling. Jerusalem was so fragile then. Second, and foundationally, because of the fear of God. His awe and reverence for the Lord undergirded all that Nehemiah did, and it was God's money. Many times we've noted how positive the Bible presents the fear of God. It's not to be associated with a negative fearfulness. And then Nehemiah's final prayer here. Remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people. A way of expressing he had done all for God's people as to the Lord, and his time, energies, and gifts. I'm so glad Nehemiah put this testimonial here because it completes the picture of him and his wholehearted sacrificial devotion to the Lord's people. It was like when Paul said to the Corinthians, I will most gladly spend and be spent for your souls. What more could Nehemiah have given to Jerusalem? And did the Lord answer Nehemiah's prayer to remember him after this life? Well, we think he did. God is so generous. Well, next week, Lord willing, the struggle between the wall builders and those enemies will come to a decisive conclusion. Thanks very much.